You are strawmanning the concept of progressive overload. You're creating your own narrative around this universally applied concept, a narrative that no one who knows what they're doing would ever possibly agree with. What's up, guys? Enkiri here, and I hope that everyone had a fantastic new year. I know that I sure did, but now it's time to get back to work, and I've gotten several requests for this one. So today, I want to talk a little bit about Ryan Humiston, and I'm going to be addressing just one video of his specifically, primarily, and many of you guys have probably seen that video already. He released it just a couple months ago. I think it was in November. And it's a pretty short one. It's only about 3 minutes long, but he manages to cram a whole lot of woof into those 3 short minutes. And the video is called Why I Built More Muscle from Light Weights. But so rather than just talk at you guys this whole time, because I have a tendency to drag on, and I have a feeling that's what this video is going to do. But instead of just talk at you guys the whole time, what I kind of want to do is go through his video and rebut things point by point, on a point by point basis, because I think that'll provide the greatest clarity and the greatest context for what my thoughts are here and how they kind of run counter to what he's asserting throughout most of his video. So let's just jump right into it.
Now, before you say this guy's full of shit, I progressively overload, and I think it's the way to go. I'm not here to argue with you. If it works for you, keep doing it. Just for me, never worked that well. So if you're watching this and you feel like you're busting your ass, but you're not getting the results you want, and you're focused on what I would deem the wrong thing, which is how much weight you can lift, it's not going to work for you either.
So here, just to boot things off, he's already introduced a flawed premise, right? And now he's going to build his entire argument on a false foundation, on top of a false foundation, because he has to, because he started with a false premise. And that is disingenuous at best when you're addressing such a large group of people as Ryan's fan base is. But in simply laying out his premise here, he's already created a false equivalence whereby progressive overload, by default, essentially automatically has to mean just continually stacking weight onto the bar, which is untrue. There are many ways to induce overload that don't involve adding weight to the bar, and there are many ways to coax being able to handle more weight properly. The key word here being properly, that don't involve simply immediately throwing more and more weight onto the bar. Common sense be damned. As well, his video is literally titled Why I Built More Muscle from Light Weight. But then, the very first thing that he does is assert that the concept of progressive overload, which is quite literally the fundamental basis of all weight training, is not an ideal way to build muscle. As if to suggest that one cannot induce progressive overload using light weights. But that idea, that concept, that assertion makes no sense. Training heavy versus training light is a completely separate concept from training progressively versus not training progressively. And you can, in fact, induce overload with light weights in high rep ranges just the same as you can induce overload with heavy weight in low rep ranges. And to suggest otherwise indicates that you either don't have a firm grasp of the concept or you are trying to sell me something, which I believe in this case it is the latter. And what he's trying to sell me is his training ideas and by proxy his YouTube channel and ultimately his brand.
Because I've had so many comments, let me go into a little bit more detail because it's more than just lightening the weight. And if you are somebody who progressively overloads and you have a body part that's lacking, I guarantee if you do what I'm about to tell you, it's going to grow.
Now, this part I actually agree with on a fundamental level because ultimately what he's really suggesting is just hitting a particular muscle with a lot of volume and using relatively light weights and really focusing on the quality of the contractions of the target muscle. And for people who are already strong and have already built a base of strength and muscle, this is actually a very viable approach. And it lines up with many of the training concepts that we know to be good for inducing hypertrophy specifically. However, Ryan's off-the-fly, train-by-connectedness approach and the vast array of largely unnecessary and gimmicky exercises that he uses for many body parts are another story altogether. But those aspects notwithstanding, the core principle that he's espousing here, that he's emphasizing here in this particular instance, is something that I can't agree with.
And by the end of this video, if you still disagree, just leave your address and your favorite color. I'll have a bag of dicks sent out to you by this weekend.
Blue, please.
Let's first talk about how most people progress to the sets of an exercise. Let's use standing dumbbell curl, for example. They'll walk to the rack, do an easier set, and they'll go, okay, I'm going to go up. They go up, it gets a little tougher. Maybe they go up again, and they go, oh, that's too heavy. They either keep that same weight, they drop back down, and that's their exercise. To me, that's all wrong.
To me, that is also all wrong, but this is just another straw man argument. So it's moot anyway. No one who knows what they're doing is advocating training like this, and anyone who trains haphazardly like this is either aimless or doesn't know what they're doing. But to suggest that abiding by the core principle of weight training is somehow a flawed idea because most people who enter the gym don't know how to train properly or write a program properly or put together a logical workout utilizing appropriate set and rep schemes and intensity levels with properly applied progressive overload, to suggest that we should throw out the core principle of weight training entirely just because the average gym goer doesn't know how to properly apply it is some of the most inane, backwards, and twisted logic that I have ever fucking heard. Personally, I don't know how to use Newton's laws of motion to calculate the force required to send a rocket to Mars. And most people that I know don't know how to do that either. So, does that mean that we should discard Newton's laws of motion entirely just because most people don't know how to use them? Because that is what he's suggesting here. If there are any laws when it comes to the weight room, progressive overload is law number 1. And this guy is suggesting we should throw that law out the window. I find that baffling.
I think a better way to look at it is after that first set, instead of just unconsciously thinking, okay, I need to add more weight, instead just think of how can I connect this exercise better? Or how do I make sure that this is the best exercise for me to do? By all means, if you have an incredible connection to just regular curls, add more weight and blow up those biceps. You shouldn't have a problem. But I still think it's a good idea to always test different angles, tempo, mechanical disadvantages, range of motion, because you never know what you're going to connect with that day. And for me, connection is everything. That's why I'll never understand why some people say, why can't he just do regular exercises? Why is he trying to reinvent the wheel? Same reason you don't use those waterbed style dumbbells or the plastic ones with the concrete on the inside. When you drop it, it cracks in half. Because they fucking suck. There's a better way.
And here's where Ryan really starts to provide us with some insight into his disconnect from reality. And I touched on this theme in my recent video titled Natural versus Enhanced, Should We Take Advice from Enhanced Lifters? Which I'll link below in the description for those who haven't seen it. But my thoughts at the time when I made that video, I mentioned Ryan specifically, and my thoughts went something like this. Ryan Humiston immediately comes to mind as he's probably one of the more popular ones at the moment. But here, for example, you have a guy who's clearly been in the game for a very long time, has built a very, very impressive physique, and carries far, 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 far more muscle than I could ever hope to dream of carrying. However, he comes onto YouTube, amasses a huge following, which by default is going to consist primarily of beginner trainees, and then he goes on to basically discourage traditional progressive overload, essentially by strawmanning the concept of adding weight to the bar. And dissecting that advice specifically is a whole other topic for a whole other day. But in Ryan's case, you have a guy who's obviously very strong and who obviously built his base of strength and muscle using many of the very concepts that he now speaks out against. He's also very obviously pushing the gas pedal pretty heavily, and it doesn't take a fucking rocket surgeon to figure out that a big, strong, enhanced guy like Ryan is going to be able to get far, far more out of many of the unique techniques that he currently espouses than a young, weak, inexperienced trainee with no muscle on his frame to speak of. And that really sums up my main issue with the advice that he's giving here, because he's preaching it to the wrong choir. He's a very highly advanced hypertrophy guy, right? And he has 630,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel as of this week. Now, how many of those subscribers are also going to be highly advanced hypertrophy guys? How many of those subscribers are even going to be enhanced lifters at all? And how many of those subscribers does this sort of advice, given those two things, have any application to whatsoever? Because I'm betting that in reality, it's damn near nil. And if we look at other advanced hypertrophy guys with large outreaches, guys on YouTube like John Meadows or Mike Israetel, can you really imagine either of those guys saying anything like this, giving any advice that's anything like what he's giving in this video? Israetel, for example, has talked extensively about using the concept of RIR, or reps in reserve, for optimal hypertrophy training. And within the framework of that concept, he discusses how to properly add weight to the bar and how to add reps to an exercise over the course of a mesocycle, which is progressive overload.
So what this ends up being is that, if you start a mesocycle, you should probably start at 3 or 4 IR, and then slowly the reps in reserve should deteriorate until you get to 0 reps in reserve, and that's pretty close to where you end your mesocycle. You take a deload and then recycle again.
John Meadows talks about using a power building approach as the quote-unquote meat and potatoes portion, the primary portion of his mountain dog style workouts. Mountain dog being the term that's been coined for his style of training.
A squat, maybe a rack pull deadlift or something like that. So now you're looking at compound exercises that are more kind of power building, as we used to call it in nature. And this is going to make kind of the meat and potatoes up of your workout. And this is the one where we really track progressive overload. So
again, here, utilizing the concept of progressive overload. And these guys are also, just like Ryan, both very highly advanced hypertrophy guys. They've both been around the game for a long, long time. They both have a shitload of experience. They're both very smart. And I'm not trying to offend anyone here, but I believe that they're both also enhanced as well. And neither of them is hiding it. And they're both trying to achieve the same thing as Ryan Humiston, which is maximal muscle hypertrophy. Yet, in spite of that, in spite of being in a similar boat as Ryan in terms of goals, neither of these guys are disconnected from reality the way that Ryan is. They're both preaching a message that is applicable, not just to other advanced, enhanced hypertrophy guys, but a message that's also applicable to and has great value to the average gym goer as well, or to the average guy who just wants to put on a bit of muscle and get a better looking body, which undeniably is the vast majority of YouTube fitness viewers. Ryan, on the other hand, is preaching concepts that apply to almost nobody in his audience. Very niche, very highly specific concepts. And even that's one thing that can probably be let to slide. No one really cares. But then it's another thing altogether to sit there and say that utilizing the concept, the law of progressive overload, is simply not going to work for you.
Just for me, never worked that well. It's not going to work for you either.
Or that traditional compound exercises outright suck.
Because they fucking suck.
No, that is simply disingenuous. Saying stuff like that shows that you are simply disconnected from reality. Here's reality and here's Ryan. The two never reconcile. They're disconnected. You have entirely lost touch with what it's like to be a natural and less experienced trainee. And you simply can't make those sorts of statements with a straight face to someone who doesn't have the benefit of exogenous hormones coursing through their system, which is the vast majority of us.
Also, this is a long-term play because you can't lift heavy for years. It's only a matter of time before something gives out. And I don't know about you, but when I squat heavy, I'm done. My central nervous system is just cashed. I feel like I spent half the morning jamming my prick in a light socket, and all I want to do is sleep and eat after that.
Again, you are conflating concepts here, dude. It's all well and good to assert that you think that you can get better leg hypertrophy from light squats as opposed to from heavy squats. I wouldn't even fucking argue with that. But then, why are you even discussing progressive overload in your video at all? It's a completely unrelated concept. How heavy that a particular weight is in a particular training session has nothing to do with inducing progressive overload or not. And as I alluded to earlier, you can induce overload using 60% of your 1 rep max. Or you can induce it using 90% of your 1 rep max. Or you can induce it using 40% of your 1 rep max. Training intensity, training light versus training heavy is a separate concept altogether from progressive overload. And yet Ryan, for some reason, is dead set on conflating those ideas, but that makes no fucking sense at all. And frankly, whether he wants to admit it or not, if Ryan is still gaining muscle at this stage in his career, and I can't attest to that, I can't attest to whether he actually is or isn't gaining muscle, but if he is, it is because he's still inducing progressive overload. He's just doing it differently than he did before. He's using other means now. But just call a fucking spade a spade. I hate when people do that. Call a spade a spade. I prefer training with lightweights now, and I find it more productive for hypertrophy given my personal circumstances and proclivities. End quote. Nothing else needs to be said. You haven't cracked the fucking code, dude. You build a base of muscle and you build a base of strength using traditional compound exercises that you performed for many years. And now you prefer to do lighter pump work, and being an advanced and an enhanced lifter allows you to get away with that.
I think what it came down to for me is when I let my ego go, as well as some of those old ingrained beliefs that I got from an old high school coach that wore way too short of shorts. Things like you're going to grow the most from compound lifts. I don't think that's the case. I think it just comes down to whatever stimulates that muscle the most.
And when there are no exogenous hormones involved, the most absolute stimulation invariably occurs during the performance of compound exercise. Enhanced trainees don't necessarily have to follow these rules though, because among other things, steroids dramatically enhance muscle protein synthesis to the point where you're basically in a positive nitrogen balance all the fucking time. And if you have just started taking steroids, if you're new to steroids, you can quite literally build muscle while sitting on your ass. So yeah, throwing in some curls and some lateral raises invariably enhances those effects, and compound exercises are not necessarily required in that case. But for a natural trainee, the training session itself must be what stimulates muscle protein synthesis. And good luck doing that if you continually skip the tried and true compound exercises.
If you can do it with a compound lift, great. But I'm still going to argue that you're going to get more out of tweaking the form and tweaking the exercise than just stacking on more weight.
At this point, it's honestly a little bit irritating. This is the exact same argument that pure bullfit tried to make when him and the other two stooges were slandering me over my original Athlete X critique video. But no one who knows what they're doing is advising people to just throw weight onto the bar ad infinitum, willy fucking nilly, common sense be fucking damned. No one is saying that. So people need to stop making that straw man argument. Within the framework of a proper training program, weight is coaxed onto the bar, right? I've said this before and I will fucking say it again. This strength training, this weight training shit is an art. You add weight where you can, when you can, and in the appropriate dosage. But in addition to that, lifting form and efficiency are also paramount. Having solid and stable motor patterns is paramount. Utilizing a gradual, intelligent, and progressive approach is also paramount. But by disingenuously boiling it all down to
just stacking on more weight,
you are strawmanning the concept of progressive overload. You're creating your own narrative around this universally applied concept, a narrative that no one who knows what they're doing would ever possibly agree with. And you're using that false straw man narrative to argue that your way is somehow better, even though it undercover still utilizes the concept of progressive overload, regardless of how much you want to pretend that it doesn't.
Let me give you a checklist to follow. First, at any point during an exercise, if you lose the connection or you start to feel other muscles jump in more than the one you're trying to work, you've gone too heavy. Second, always test. See what you really connect with that day, because your only goal here is to kick your own ass.
You don't even need to use weight. Hell, I can get a more potent growth stimulus using air resistance than you motherfuckers can get from a 50-pound dumbbell, because I am just so fucking connected to my biceps. And be sure to shoot from the hip every day also. You should have no plan whatsoever going to the fucking gym. Just fire from the hip. If it feels good that day, then do it. And if it doesn't, then just throw it in the fucking trash can. A little bit of hyperbole there, but honestly, this is a huge red flag. It's a page out of the Kai Green playbook, basically. And all due respect to guys who built a lot of freaking mass, it is not an easy thing to do under any circumstance. But When you start talking like this, it becomes abundantly fucking clear that you have lost touch with reality. You are not checking your enhanced privilege, and you don't know what it's like to be a natural lifter, and you don't know how to train someone who doesn't have the benefit of exogenous hormones. Point blank. The body needs to be confronted with a potent stimulus to be convinced to disrupt homeostasis beyond a rudimentary level. That's simply a fact. And it is another fact that for the natural lifter, the most efficient way to accomplish this in the long run is with compound exercises and progressive overload. That's really all there is to it. And when you guys start harping on about feeling a muscle working in the middle of the freaking exercise that you're doing as being the most important variable, when someone starts talking like that, then you should just run the other fucking way, especially if you're a beginner. And like I said in my other video, I don't think that Ryan's message is altogether invalid or anything like that. Nothing of the sort, actually. I think that there's a time and a place and a specific population for a message like the one that he's espousing in this video. And I think that guys like him, with his sort of anecdotal experience, which is all that I have as well, so I think that guys like that are some of the most valuable assets that the Iron Game has to offer. However, he does need to put a big old disclaimer in front of his video, like this particular video, something that says, oh, I don't know, this advice is probably not going to work for you because chances are you don't fall into the highly specific niche that this advice is applicable to. Or maybe this advice should only be viewed as the cherry on top of an already sound training program. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he ignores altogether the fact that his advice is not broadly applicable, especially not to beginners and especially not to natural trainees, while ironically preaching to a gigantic audience full of beginners and full of natural trainees. And that is just an unfortunate and sorry state of affairs. So if you know somebody who's been taking advice like Ryan's advice in this video and has been spinning their wheels in the gym or not making the progress that they want to be making, then send them this video. Have them give it a watch and save a friend from shitty training advice. That is your duty for the day. And that's all I got for today, guys. Please be sure to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And definitely leave me some love in the comments down below. And if you're interested in online coaching, be sure to shoot me an email at enkiri.elite@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to pass some more information your way. Or simply visit my website, www.enkirielitefitness.com, for more details. Keep training hard, and I will catch you guys next time.